Looks like we are streaming. We'll give it another minute and start right at 10. And at 10 o'clock. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our session. We will go ahead and do some introductions and talk a little bit about Civic Action Week and then get into our content. But I'll hand it over to Evelyn.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on day 3 of Civic Action Week for Basic Needs Insecurity. As many of you know, Civic Action Week is a campus-wide event for students, faculty, staff, and the broader community to educate, engage, and encourage collective responses to the pandemic and persistent societal challenges. In our second year, we've advanced our framework to deepen our understanding through dialogue, deliberation, and disruption. We are going to have multiple sessions throughout the week. As you know, this is our 3rd day of Civic Action Week. Registration is closed for a couple of our events, but everything is being live streamed and recorded, so you can always circle back later to find out what you may have missed out on. So yeah, I'm going to pass it off to the Pitt Service team to get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Evelyn. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Sierra Staley. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I work in the office of Pitt Serves, where I serve as pantry coordinator and sustainability program assistant.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Goodfellow. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a sustainability coordinator for business and auxiliary services. So I work closely with Sierra and the Pitt Serves team on basic needs issues.
All right, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Can someone in the Zoom just confirm that you can see the screen? As I get back to the beginning.
Yep.
We're good. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is a session that has happened, had a couple of iterations before this. The purpose of this presentation is really for staff, faculty, and student leaders who have student interaction to have a better understanding of what this word basic needs means and how to help support students who might be struggling with different forms of basic needs insecurity. So I want to start with a couple of acknowledgements and just thinking about the purpose of Civic Action Week, and the conversation that we're about to have is really rooted in this theme of justice and systems. And part of systems thinking has to do with scales. So that includes time scales, thinking about how our history has led us to this present moment, as well as temporal scales. So I want to start by just reading to you all the university's land acknowledgement. We recognize that the University of Pittsburgh occupies the ancestral land of the Adena culture, Hopewell culture, and Monongahela peoples, who were later joined by refugees of other tribes, including the Delaware Shawnee and Haudenosaunee, driven here from their homelands by colonizers. We honor these traditional native inhabitants of this place and uplift their historic, unique, and enduring relationship with this land, which is their ancestral territory. Furthermore, we pay our respects to their elders and their past, present, and future people, culture, and community. While we cannot change the past, we commit to continued gratitude for the gifts of nature, along with ongoing respect, care, and stewardship of the land, each other, and future generations. And I want to make a couple other acknowledgements that are kind of unique to this presentation. So we're going to be talking a little bit about basic needs, which includes issues around food and housing insecurities. And I just want to mention that these reflect broader systems of oppression. So we recognize that access to basic needs resources has been disproportionately and systematically denied to members of the BIPOC community, members of the LGBTQ+ communities, immigrants, and other groups of people who have been systemically marginalized. We recognize this is not only the general product of our white capitalist colonialist national history, but also is happening right here in the city of Pittsburgh through our history of redlining, other forms of gentrification, and other forms of marginalization. So furthermore, we recognize that these are systems in which we as individuals in the university can no longer be complicit. But we also recognize that we live and work within these systems, meaning that some of the ideas and concepts which we're going to discuss in this presentation might well reflect the lived experiences of our presenters or those of you in the audience. So if that applies to you, we just want to welcome you to bring your full selves to this presentation. You're going to have some opportunities to engage mostly through the chat function and a poll a little bit later on, but We recognize that these experiences are traumatic, and we invite everyone to challenge by choice, but also take space as needed. So that said, here's a little bit about what we're going to be talking about through the course of the next 45 minutes to hour. We're going to start by defining this word or phrase, basic needs, that we're using, and talk about why we're having this conversation. Give a little bit of history about how we got to the present moment. I'm going to share some information with you all about what we know as a Campus Basic Needs Committee about what's going on at Pitt. And then we're going to open it up for you to talk a little bit about your experiences and how you've seen students experience basic needs insecurity. And then after that, we're going to take kind of a very surface level look at some campus resources. It's not going to be fully comprehensive. That would take us a lot more time than we have today. But then we'll leave it at the end for some questions and answers. We'll share our contact information and kind of have any discussion that you might be interested in. Because of the way that we're engaging today, where you all are joining via the YouTube live stream, we encourage you to pose your questions in the YouTube stream, which we will have someone be reading at the end of our presentation. So you can go ahead and send those questions at any time. Just know that we're going to be taking them at the end of the presentation. And if you have a question after the fact, please feel free to reach out to either Nick or myself. So when we use this phrase basic needs at Pitt, we are referring to issues of justice that are social, emotional, physical, and planetary. So we're talking about things like clean air and water, food, housing, clothing, access to hygiene items, access to healthcare, and also some things that are specific to being a student. So access to appropriate technology or academic and career success services. And also some things that are specific to the place that we live in Pittsburgh, like transportation. All of those things fall under this definition of what Pitt students need to be successful and to be able to focus on being students. So why do we talk about this? Because lots and lots of research has shown us that when students are able to meet their basic needs, they're going to have better health, physical and mental health. They're going to do better in class or at work, generally have a higher reported quality of life. And because this issue is so rooted in issues of injustice, when we can ensure that students have their basic needs met, it's also helping us create a stronger sense of equity on campus. So this is kind of the quick and dirty history of basic needs on our campus. And I want to be clear, I've been doing this work for about 4 years, and I don't want to take credit for this basic needs work on campus because we have staff, including probably some of you who are watching right now, who have been working to support our students for decades, right? And I want to honor that work. Because this term basic needs is new and our discussion is, but what we know is that you all have been putting in this effort for a very long time. Particularly, one of the basic needs that we focus on as a Campus Basic Needs Committee is food insecurity, which those discussions started in the year 2014 when a group of students approached Dr. Kathy Humphrey, who was at that time the Dean of Students, and that led to our campus food pantry. A few years after that, we started using this term basic needs broadly on campus when Pitt hosted the first ever regional collegiate basic needs dialogue. And that was really kind of the springboard for a lot of our basic needs efforts on campus. A couple of years after that, we decided as an institution that we wanted to engage in some additional research and have a specific person who could focus on understanding gaps and barriers that students are facing and accessing resources. So we worked with the Campus Compact of New York and Pennsylvania to actually have a basic needs coordinator position. And part of what came out of that role was we were able to establish a Campus Basic Needs Committee composed of students, staff, and faculty from across campus back in February of 2020. And if any of you are interested in learning more about the Basic Needs Committee and how that works and how you can kind of share information, the representatives for Business and Auxiliary Services, which is the group that this presentation was originally marketed toward, are Nick who is on this presentation, as well as Kathleen Kyle. If anyone else is currently joining from a different department or area within the university and you're interested in learning more about who your representative is, we welcome you to either ask that in the Q&A or follow up with us after the presentation. But the other thing that came out of this broader scale discussion of basic needs is an understanding that in order to make real action that achieves sustainable change, we needed a better understanding of how many students were experiencing basic needs insecurities and what that actually looks like on our campus. So last year in fall, we participated in the National Real College Assessment, which we had about 5,000 students. And that survey covered questions about food and housing, anxiety and depression, experiences with the COVID-19 pandemic, challenges related to employment, specific challenges for parenting students, as well as other topics. And those results were published this past summer. So what I'm going to do next is take you through a couple of areas of the Real College survey results. I'm not going to go through all of them. If you're interested in learning more about some of the other topics, I do encourage you to check out the publication. It's under the Division of Student Affairs, Office of the Dean. There's a website link to that I can also share after the presentation. But I want to take a second and kind of focus in on food and housing and what we've learned about student experiences around that. So through the results of this survey, we learned that of the 5,000 students who participated, 43% had experienced some form of food or housing insecurity. Now, within that category, they have a couple of different ways that they measure those things. So within food insecurity, we had 18% of students, and I'll get to the breakdown of that on the next slide. 33% of Pitt students were experiencing some form of housing insecurity. And then within that, 11% of students had actually experienced homelessness during that time. So what does that actually look like? For those who aren't familiar, the way that the USDA defines food insecurity is limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate and safe food, or the ability to acquire food in socially acceptable ways. And that nutritionally adequate piece is really important for us, because if you look at this graph on the right-hand side, the way that the USDA differentiates between different levels of food security is there's very low food security, which is what we tend to think of when we hear that phrase, people who are actually hungry, who are skipping meals or aren't eating enough food. And that was 9% of our students who responded to the survey. But we also had this other 9% of students who fall into this category of low food security. Now, this phrase applies to people who might be getting enough to eat, but aren't really getting enough of the foods that they need. So their food's not nutritionally adequate. And historically and culturally, I think we've all seen a lot of dialogue around this as being part of the college diet, where something happens when people become college students, where suddenly it's expected of them to consume nutritionally inadequate foods like ramen or macaroni and cheese. And we want to be very clear that that should not be the norm. So when we talk about food insecurity on campus, to be clear, what we're saying is students shouldn't just have access to enough food. It should be enough of the types of food that they need to be nutritionally sustained, and they should be able to acquire that food in socially acceptable ways. To get into that a little bit further, what does this food insecurity look like for students? So basically, here on the right-hand side, these are the questions that the survey actually asked, right? This is how we determined whether students were experiencing food insecurity. And some of the more alarming statistics that came out of that were 22% of the respondents said they couldn't afford to eat balanced meals. So this comes back to that idea of maybe having enough food to eat, but not enough nutritious food. Beyond that, 19%, almost 1 in 5 students, worried about running out of the food that they had before they had money to buy more. So this really goes back to this concept of socially acceptable ways of accessing food. And in addition to the actual food insecurity itself, the mental and psychological and physical impacts of food insecurity. In addition to that, as you can see in the graph, 15% of students identified that they had been cutting the size of meals or skipping meals or just eating less than they felt like they should because they were concerned about having enough money for food. And a smaller number of students, 11%, just were not eating when they were hungry or skipping meals relatively often, so 3 or more times during the survey period. And then at the bottom here, you can kind of see some of the more severe impacts of food insecurity, students who are experiencing weight loss because they don't have enough food, students who are going a whole day without eating, and students who are doing that on a recurring basis, which those numbers are much lower, but again, our goal is for those to be 0. Furthermore, we had 33% of students who were experiencing some form of housing insecurity. And again, the way that housing insecurity is defined for the purposes of the assessment is really broad. It goes beyond what most folks tend to think of when they think of homelessness. It includes things like being able to pay for utilities, so like your gas bill or your electricity or water, being worried about paying rent or paying a mortgage, having rent or mortgage costs increase, moving from place to place, so kind of not knowing where you'll be in a month. So within that 33%, as you can see in the graph on the right, we had 16% of students who said that they moved 3 or more times during the survey period. Smaller percentages had expressed challenges with utilities or rent, but again, we recognize that this is a recurring problem for students on our campus. And then to break that down further, so housing insecurity is defined very broadly. Homelessness has kind of a stricter definition. So some of the signs and symptoms of homelessness are staying with a relative or friend or couch surfing, staying in a vehicle, staying at a hotel or motel without knowing where students are going to return to, staying in a public location like a shelter or an outdoor location, like outside at a bus stop, anything like that. So we had effectively 1 in 10 students had experienced at least one of these things. Most common was like couch surfing. So students who were staying with a relative or friend, but didn't have a consistent place to live. And again, we find that these numbers are kind of in line with national averages for 4-year universities, but we really want these to be 0, because what we know is that when students are able to have a safe and secure place to live, again, that's going to improve not only their performance in school and work and future career success, but also health and overall quality of life. So the last piece of information that I want to share from the survey has to do with, of students who are experiencing basic needs insecurities, how many knew about the resources that were available to them on campus and how many actually used those resources. So this graph it features 4 different types of emergency resources. The first is emergency aid. So this would apply to something like our Student Emergency Assistance Fund at Pitt. The second is help with SNAP. The third has to do with finding affordable housing. And the last one has to do with emergency housing. And what I really want to focus on here is you can see there are 3 categories. So that orange color of the bars indicates students who have used these resources. The blue is students who have heard of but not used. And the red has to do with students who have not heard of. So as you can tell, the number of students who have utilized these resources is relatively small. The number of students who have heard of these resources is relatively large, sometimes around 50%. But I really want to emphasize this middle section, which is students who have heard of but not taken advantage of existing resources, either on campus or in the community, because this is where we have the most direct opportunity to help. So we have anecdotal information around basic needs, particularly around food, that a lot of times students don't feel comfortable utilizing resources, and that can happen for a lot of reasons. It can be because a lot of times reaching out for help is still very stigmatized, and that is, has to do a lot with our national culture, but also the cultures that students are bringing, depending on the values with which they are raised and their home life. A lot of times students feel uncomfortable because they think that their experience just isn't bad enough and other people need it more. So these are all different types of stigma that we're working through as a campus basic needs committee and trying to think about how we can make sure that students not only know about the resources that are available to them, but actually feel safe and comfortable using them. And what we know anecdotally, particularly for resources like our campus food pantry, is that across the board, students are most likely to use a resource when they hear about it from someone they trust. So it's not about me doing these types of presentations. It's about you all who are on this call, the staff and faculty and student leaders who are working with students day to day, who are talking with your friends or your students or even your colleagues, making sure that they know that these resources are available, and creating an atmosphere of trust and comfort so that they feel safe actually taking advantage of them. So I want to take a step back now. I've been talking at you for several minutes. I want to share some things that we've heard from Pitt staff members so far about what they're seeing. And then we're going to kind of get out of this PowerPoint for a second and actually have an opportunity for you all to tell us a little bit about what you're seeing. So to kick us off, basically, so we had asked via a poll several staff members from business and auxiliary services, what does basic needs and security look like to you? What are you noticing student experiences? And here are some things that we heard. So students eating small meals or not eating as often as others and wearing the same clothes over and over again. Students having trouble finding safe and affordable housing. One story was that one time in winter, a student didn't have a coat, so that staff member was actually able to give them one from one of their vendors. Some students who don't have access to federal loans, don't have cash in their pockets or access to resources. A lot of staff members said that they're not sure how to advise students in these situations or whether the systems are actually in place for them. And this last one I think is particularly important, right? We have a bank of resources available, but it would be helpful to have more knowledge on the services those resources provide. That's the heart of why we're here today. That's why we're talking to you, because we know that these services are available, but we want to make sure that you all feel empowered to be sharing them and that students know how to actually utilize them. So those are some things that we've been told. I'm going to take a break here and do a quick Menti Pull. For those of you who have never done a Menti Pull before, it's totally anonymous. The way that you can access the poll is you go to menti.com and you can do this on your computer, your phone, basically any way that you would access the internet. And then the code that you use to answer this question is at the top of my screen here. It's 44300555. And I'm also going to pause and ask one of the other folks in the Zoom to confirm that you can currently see the Menti screen.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we'll just give it a minute for folks to kind of answer this question. In what ways have you noticed basic needs and securities impacting Pitt students? And while you're kind of logging in and answering that question, I want to be kind of transparent in the reason that we're asking it. It's not just a discussion tool for right now. This is actually a tool that we're using as a basic needs committee to engage with staff, faculty, and student leaders for our purposes. So we are right now in the very early stages of preparing a report for senior leadership with recommendations in response to the basic needs survey. And one of our goals is to make sure that different types of voices are being heard in those recommendations. So this is actually one of the ways that we're able to capture feedback through polls like this to make sure that that's ingrained in what we are writing in our report and our recommendations. So again, it's totally anonymous, but but this is also a really useful tool for us. Can't afford textbooks. Yeah, that's a big one, right? Textbooks are very expensive, and it depends sometimes on what students are studying, how many textbooks they're needing. Taking food, yeah, wearing the same clothes. Yeah, so food insecurity can look a lot of different ways. We talked about that definition in acquiring food in socially acceptable ways. So a lot of times what that might look like is someone who is stealing food or taking food or accessing the dining halls in a way that might not be socially acceptable. Lacking financial resources, lack of quality food, couch jumping. Students who are sleepy, yeah, students who are falling asleep in class, absolutely. Lack of technology, yeah, imagine, we ask a lot of our students, and particularly in certain programs, are very reliant on technological resources. And if students don't have access to those technologies, that can be very challenging. Food preparation, yeah, students not having access to the facilities that they need to prepare food. Yeah, I'll give it like another 10 seconds. Maybe more, maybe we'll give it 30 seconds. While folks are maybe entering their last response or two, I want to take a second and kind of talk about this lacking financial resources in particular, because that's something that can look a lot of different ways. And that might not always be obvious to those of us who are interacting with students, particularly in a staff or faculty role. A lot of times, if a student is showing up unprepared for class or unprepared for an activity, it can kind of be easy to fall into this trend of asking the student what's going on, but in a way that maybe not be totally supportive or possibly accusatory. And it's really important to keep in mind that the way that students deal with struggling financially can look really different. And a lot of times what we think is the student who might be showing up late or not participating fully or not completing work can have kind of a larger financial undercurrent. Can't afford to see a doctor. Yeah, struggling with healthcare access, inability to buy food. Yeah, these are all, I don't want to say they're great, they're terrible, but these are all really strong examples of ways that these challenges might show up in the work environment as we interact with students. So now that we have an idea of what these things look like, we're going to switch gears and actually start talking to you about some resources that are available on campus that you can share with students who are experiencing some of these challenges that you just told us about. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nick.
Thank you, Sierra, and thanks for your review of the basic needs real college survey results. Those are definitely eye-opening. So I'm going to share a few resources, but we're going to end up at sort of the most important resource, which is a resource guide that's put together by the University Library Service. So I'll start with a few examples of programs that actually Sierra runs for the most part. And then we'll get into some other resources at the university and the city that you can kind of navigate for yourself, but we'll do on screen. So the first and probably one of the most well-known resources is the Pit Pantry. So the Pit Pantry has been around for 5 or so years now, Sierra. It is a free pantry for students, staff, and faculty that's located in the Belfield Presbyterian Church. So this is the church on the corner of 5th and 5th Bridge? No, what is it?
Thackeray.
5th and Thackeray, right across from the towers, right next to sort of down one block from Benedum Hall, next to Nordenberg. Pretty visible central location. So it's located in the basement of the Belfield Presbyterian Church. It's run by a student board as well as student volunteers, supervised by Sierra and Pitt Serves staff. And it provides non-perishable foods, fresh produce, and household essential items to shoppers. So there are a few ways that folks can shop at the pantry. There's in-person shopping, or there may not be in-person shopping yet currently because of COVID. Yeah. So they're preparing boxes for folks, grocery boxes, but they're working on an online shopping option with some students so that folks can kind of customize what they want from the pantry. I think one of the great takeaway from Sierra's portion of the presentation was that folks are more likely to use these resources if someone they trust tells them or shows them it. So I encourage, and those of you who are supervisors, especially in my own department, I know we work closely with students, whether it's in the university stores, at Panther Central, or in other capacities. Make sure that your students are aware of this. Make sure you talk about the Pitt Pantry, right? And not just in a setting where you may be, trying to provide resources to a student, but just talk about it in a sort of less intentional way and sort of just sort of normalize it as a resource. I think that'd be great. The next resource is another one related to food, and this is the Meal Assistance Program. So while the Pitt Pantry provides non-perishables, produce, that sort of thing that requires cooking, the Meal Assistance Program allows students who are approved to receive a certain allotment of meal passes, 15 meal passes, which are loaded directly onto their Panther card. So this is designed for students experiencing food insecurity due to an emergency or an unforeseen circumstance. And so with those meal passes, students can go to the eatery or the Perch or any of our on-campus dining facilities. And in doing so, they're not required to cook, and they're able to get food just like everyone else on campus who has meal passes, which is a great benefit and helps to sort of normalize their experience. As well as the 15 meal passes, all students receive a customized list of additional resources and an opportunity to meet one-on-one to discuss additional long-term options. And Sierra, jump in. I think this is a pretty quick turnaround from the application from when a student applies to when they actually receive the meal passes, right?
Yeah, so it depends on the information that students provide in their application, but our goal is 1 week or less.
Yeah, that's great. So there's an email address there, mealassistance@pitt.edu. This does not impact your scholarship eligibility. It's a great resource for those who, again, are dealing with an emergency or unforeseen circumstances. Another program that is run out of Pitt Serves and Student Affairs is the University of Pittsburgh. It's another pretty popular program on campus. It's a on-campus student-run thrift store located in the O'Hara Student Center. So that's sort of next to Soldiers and Sailors on O'Hara and what's that cross street? Can't remember.
One of them is Thackeray and the other is whatever street Nordenberg is on.
Yeah, next to Nordenberg Hall and the University Club, the O'Hara Student Center. Pittsburgh is located within that. So you have to go into the O'Hara Student Center to get into the University of Pittsburgh. So they offer low-cost clothes, shoes, and accessories. And then annually at the beginning of the year, beginning of the academic year, they have a dollar sale with furniture, decorations, dorm supplies, microwaves, coffee makers that are all recovered or donated on campus. So the proceeds from the Thriftsburg are used to pay staff as well as to fund other campus sustainability projects. This is a really, really great resource. It's open to everybody in O'Hara Student Center. You can stop by and check out the resources that they have, clothes, really affordable clothes, great selection, curated almost from the donations that they get and the student managers for the store. And again, it's located in O'Hara Student Center and the hours change by the semester. They've got a great website though, and a lot of information on there. So I mentioned this sort of massive resource that we're going to be exploring, and that's this University Library Service, or ULS, resource guide. So kudos to Leslie Poljak and the folks who helped Leslie with this, but this is really what we want everyone to take away, is that this is the resource to go to if you have a question, or if you're looking to direct someone to a basic needs resource. This is the most comprehensive guide that we've seen, and we direct everyone to it. So it covers resources related to food, housing, health, employment, and it's not just the resources on campus, but also on the community. So we're actually going to take a moment to explore this with you all right now. And for those of you who registered, we'll be sending out notes, including a link to this. But if you want to look it up yourself, you can go to bit.ly/help-resources. And you need to be mindful of capitalization and only enter the URL just as it's described there. So we'll go through this now. So yeah, Sierra, what do you think where should we start with this?
Yeah, I think just based on some of the answers that you all shared, I know quite a few people said food. So the thing that I like a lot about this guide, like Nick said, is it's campus and community-based resources. So something that we experience a lot, particularly in graduate student communities, is students don't live in Oakland. So they might not want to take advantage of a campus resource. They might want something that's closer to their home. So the guide has links to Pit Pantry, and Meal Scholarships is actually the former name for the Meal Assistance Program. So that's the one that Nick just described. But also, if a student is living in South Oakland or Squirrel Hill or another Pittsburgh neighborhood, there's a really comprehensive list on here of other food banks, food pantries, kitchens, and resources. So if someone doesn't live in Oakland, or the timing of a particular campus service doesn't work for them, this is a really nice opportunity to help them find something that's going to accommodate their schedule and needs better. One thing. Yeah.
Can we go down and click like the, so we've got all these partners here. So let's click maybe like CHS, Community Human Services Food Pantry, because there's one of those in South Oakland, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the South Oakland Food Pantry on Lawn Street. Nick, is there anything particular you wanted me to talk about on there?
No, I didn't actually know it would go straight to this one location.
Yeah. So this is the food pantry on Lawn Street in particular. Community Human Services also operates a number of other food and housing and other basic needs resources.
Yeah, we've got the Pittsburgh Community Food Bank is on there. The Islamic Center, which is just up in Oakland, just up the street from us.
I will say the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank Pantry Finder website just went through an update. And I'm not going to take you the whole way through it right now, but it's very cool because what you can do is type in your zip code and then also indicate which hours you're available or would want to access food. And it will pull up a customized list of food resources based on how far they are from where your zip code is and what time of day they're open. So that's pretty neat.
Great.
Let me get back to the home screen here real quick. Somebody had said textbooks. So one of the other resources on here is the Endowed Book Fund, which is, I think, run through Pitt Program Council. It is one textbook resource that's available for students who are unable to purchase their textbooks. To give more kudos to the library and to any students who are actually on this call, pro tip for textbooks is to always check the library first, because oftentimes they will have textbooks on reserve and then you don't need to purchase them at all. But folks said trouble with finances. So there's information on this website that will go directly to the Office of Admissions and Financial Aid, as well as Pitt's Financial Wellness Center. So this is actually a relatively new program. It's led by a staff member named Joel Philliston. It is designed to help students generally who want to learn more about managing their finances, be that specific questions about how to utilize their loans or budget. Joel actually does a really cool presentation on budgeting for groceries that will probably be available again later this year. But not to dive too deep in that. For those who said access to healthcare, again, there's information on student health services on here and the University Counseling Center, as well as community-based health services. So again, sometimes if a student doesn't live in Oakland, or staff or faculty are interested in trying to learn more information about access to healthcare, there's this whole tab right here.
So I saw on here the Emergency Assistance Fund. Can we check that out real quick? So that was relatively new or sort of gained some popularity during COVID as those disruptions affected people's work. So the university does have an emergency assistance fund for students administered by the provost's office, it seems. And student affairs. So I think this is another resource that I've heard some positive reviews about. I don't know, Sierra, if you want to mention anything else about this.
I am not super familiar with the Student Emergency Assistance Fund. I will say if anyone has specific questions after the presentation, I can put you in contact with the staff members who manage that. But in general, my understanding is that it's designed for students who are kind of experiencing a short-term emergency that is putting them in a position where they need immediate financial assistance to prevent something like eviction, or kind of other sort of crisis, things that could become crises that we want to prevent from becoming crises. But yeah, Nick, is there anything else in here that you wanted to look at specifically?
Yeah, maybe let's check out the housing assistance page really quick.
Yeah.
We do get a lot of questions, especially at Panther Central and some of our departments, about housing resources. So I think this is one to just show so that folks that are watching can take a look at it. I'm not as familiar with the housing resources. I don't know, Sierra, if there are any on here that stand out to you.
So I think to go back to that definition of housing insecurity, a lot of these resources are for help with rent or help with utilities. So I think this is kind of a particularly important one that I have referred students to before, where there are actually programs through Duquesne Light and through the natural gas company that can help them if they're having trouble affording their bills. Let me see if Bigburg is on here. Yeah, Bigburg is a really comprehensive housing resource, particularly if you're not sure where to send students based on their needs. I'll go ahead and click their website just so you can see what that looks like. But again, it's designed to be kind of personalized. So if someone's looking for services that are specifically for transgender folks or for veterans or families, it will actually help you find specific resources and services, whether that's a shelter or help with some other form of housing insecurity. This is a resource that I know I've referred students to in the past.
So this is, I remember when this came out, this was really big for mobile phone, which is why it looks like this. Yeah. You sort of just kind of click. Yeah, it looks a little funny. You click the section that most applies to whoever you're looking up resources for. So let's click maybe the one of these. I don't know which one.
Sure. Click family.
Okay.
And then it kind of like takes you through more questions.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So again, the link for anyone who's interested, and we'll kind of share this with folks who registered after the fact as well, but it's a bit.ly. So this is the full address up here in the URL bar, but it's just bit.ly/help-resources. And that kind of concludes our presentation for you all, and we will open it up to audience questions. And I'll leave this screen up for a minute or two so you can get our contact information, and then I'm gonna stop sharing so that we can actually see each other's faces.
So if you have questions, you can ask them in the YouTube chat. I don't know if there's any other ways to ask questions.
There aren't any yet.
Okay, thanks, Jade.
While we're waiting, I'll ask a question. I was just curious if there's any resources for like access to menstrual products, because I feel like that's a pretty big issue that falls under basic needs and isn't normally really highlighted or addressed, because it's, there's a lot of stigma surrounding that topic sometimes, and just kind of like if you see that as an issue that students are facing here at Pitt and what options there are to help those individuals.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is a pilot program going on right now. It is a partnership between Student Health Services, the Student Office of Sustainability, Pitt Planned Parenthood, which is one of the Student Office of Sustainability affiliate organizations, and Treasure Her, which is also a student organization at the university, to provide free menstrual products in restrooms across campus. So that program is in its pilot phase right now. I can make sure that when we send out the notes for this, there's a link to the map of the locations where those products are available. If you go to those locations and either utilize the products or don't, there's also a QR code. There's like a signage on the dispenser, and there's a QR code that you can scan and give feedback that will help us review that pilot process. I'm gonna check. It looks like Jade's sending some questions over in the staff. What's the best way a faculty or staff member can assist with the basic needs work occurring on campus? That's a great question. I can kind of give some general thoughts, and then I'm also really curious, Nick, if you have specific ideas for folks who are maybe working in business and auxiliaries. So I think the big one is directly for those who are having contact with students, kind of familiarizing yourself, not memorizing the ULS guide, right? But making sure you know that that guide exists and what types of resources are on it, and knowing how to share that with students, I think is really valuable. If you're interested in actually supporting some of these resources and services, and this actually goes into the other question that someone else asked, which is what can a student do to support and assist other students? If it's something like Pitt Pantry, there are a lot of ways to get involved. There are volunteer opportunities that are open to students, staff, and faculty. If you're interested in donations or fundraising, the Pantry accepts in-kind donations. The Meal Assistance Program accepts donations of meal passes, which happens for about a week or two at the end of each semester. So for students who have meal passes, that's something that you can keep an eye out for, to donate one of your meal passes. There is an opportunity to donate financially. Actually, a lot of different campus basic needs resources. If you visit the website for the Office of Philanthropic and Alumni Engagement, and check out the Give to Pitt link, there are actually multiple student support services that you can donate financially to. So there are a lot of ways to get involved. We actually have a slide from another presentation that we didn't include in this, but that I can put when we send out the notes, called 10 Things You Can Do in 10 Minutes or Less. And it's 5 things that you can do if you are struggling with basic needs and security yourself, and 5 things that you can do to support others. That includes everything from sharing resources to writing a letter to your senator. So whatever type of civic engagement feels best for you and that you're most passionate about, it's almost certain that within that area, there's a way to support these types of services. Nick, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I think if you're a staff member, and usually at the beginning of the year, I send out resources to students that I work with about campus needs resources, or I mention it as part of their onboarding as something that they can share with, their colleagues, their coworkers who are also students, as well as their friends. I think you just think about how you can normalize it and add information about those resources into your onboarding process or something like that, so that it's sort of part of your normal training, and have a good relationship with students so that they can feel comfortable coming to you if they do feel like they need to express something about their sort of basic needs situation.
Totally. Yeah. Another question came in. If you see someone struggling, should you wait for them to approach you for help, or should you offer resources proactively? So I think that's a tough one, right? I think we want to be in a place as a university where we're sharing resources with students before they're in a place where they're struggling or need help, so that it's not the first time that they're learning about the pantry or Pittsburgh when they're actually experiencing hunger or unable to access clothing. So I think that's the first piece, is we want to be sharing these resources broadly with everyone before they find themselves in a crisis or near crisis situation. Sorry if you can hear my cats rolling around on the floor. I think, this question can be challenging because it is situational, and it depends on your relationship with that student, because there are students who might feel uncomfortable having that conversation or having that conversation in public. So I would say it kind of depends. And if whomever asked this question would like kind of more information based on the context and wants to reach out, I would be happy to kind of continue that conversation. Anything else, Jade, in the chat?
That looks like all we have.
Okay. Well, we have these 8 minutes left, which Nick and I can kind of stick around if folks have additional questions, and we can keep kind of streaming so that those answers are also saved for later. But that concludes our presentation, and I want to thank everyone again. Thank Jade and Evelyn for their help in hosting this event for us and making sure that things run smoothly, and Mike as well for helping us with IT, and the Civic Action Week Committee for all of their work making this week run so well. Thank you. Be well. Nick, is there anything else that you would want us to cover for the folks on your team who are here?
I mean, I think, a lot of the resources, and we've talked about this, are for students, but some of them are also for staff. The pantry is also for staff. A lot of those resources that are in the ULS resource guide are for staff. We've not done a basic needs survey for staff, I don't think. But, you're able to take advantage of these resources if you're eligible for them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nick. Thanks for that. Yeah, that certainly goes for the pantry. That's a resource for all members of the Pitt community, so students, staff, or faculty. yeah, a lot of the resources in that guide. I talked about students who live off campus, maybe wanting to access resources that are closer to them or work better time-wise for them. But a lot of those things, particularly things like access to healthcare, are also available for staff members. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then I think maybe we can turn off the live stream. If you have any questions after the fact, please feel free to reach